All right, so we're talking about for loops today, and you already know what a loop is. Who can tell me in plain English what exactly is a loop? What is it? What does it do, Neil? What's a loop?
It repeats action.
It repeats an action. I love that. Anybody want to build on that? Julius.
It repeats the action until it is told to break out of the loop.
Okay, so it does a thing over and over again until it's told to not do it again. I love that.
It loops the code.
It loops the code. That's about as simple as you could say it. What I wrote down here is a loop is a tool used to repeat a block of code. As long as the loop condition is true, the block of code associated with the condition is executed. So we've talked about two loops. We talked about while loops and do while loops, which could presumably run forever. Like the condition could always be true and just never end. It's called an infinite loop. That's within the realm of possibility. Now, a for loop is like a while loop. It's in the same sense with one little caveat. In a while loop, we don't necessarily know when it's going to end. It's going to end when it reaches a certain condition. But in a for loop, we define how long it's going to go before the code is executed. So what I wrote down for a for loop is a block of code associated with a condition. So it has a condition just like a while loop. The block of code will run a set number of times. That's the key difference. It's going to run a set number of times depending on the loop condition and the increment decrement value. So there's one key difference there. In a while loop, inside the parentheses, you just specify what the condition is. Do this thing while this thing is true. Pretty similar with the for loop. We have that same condition in the middle here, but we also have a starting point, a stopping point, and then we have this increment decrement situation here that tells us how to change some variable. So this is the first time where we talk about a for loop, and more specifically, it's the first time you've seen inside of a condition, there's two semicolons. We're used to putting a semicolon at the very end of a line of code. This is a weird one because you're putting it inside a set of parentheses. It's probably the first time we've seen something like that. So how does a for loop work specifically? Well, the first thing you want to do is specify where you're going to start. And usually, we're going to start with the number 0 for reasons we will describe later. Now, I'm initializing a variable called I. It's an integer. I like to use I. Sometimes you'll see J. Sometimes you'll use the word counter because that's specifically what this thing, it's going to count how many times this loop is going to run. So I'm going to start it at 0, and I'm going to run it until I is less than or equal to, let's just say 5. Now I'm going to increment this thing by 1. So I'm going to say I equals I plus 1. So what this loop does, it's going to start at 0. It's going to run some code while I is less than or equal to 5. And then once it's run that code, it's going to increment I by 1. It's going to increase it by 1. What's a faster way to write I? You could write I plus plus instead. But you don't necessarily have to make it go up. It could go down as well. You could do minus minus. And you could also do something like I plus 3.
If you did minus minus in that case, we would just end.
Well, it would always be less than or equal to 5. So it would
just go on forever.
It would run forever.
Yeah.
But for now, let's just be efficient and put I plus plus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a little out print line statement here. I'm going to say print out I plus a space. I'm actually going to just do print so it all prints on the same line. Looking at this, I have 2 questions for you. First, what's going to print out? And second, how many times do you think this loop's going to run? 6 times? Why 6?
Because it starts at 0.
0,
5 inclusive.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to run 6 times. Okay. What is it going to print?
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Is it going to print 6?
It's not going to print 6.
Let's see.
No, it's going to print 12.
Can you just accomplish this as well with a while loop?
You could. Yes. And they're basically the same thing. We'll talk about why. It depends on the situation. Like in this situation, you could use either one.
Okay.
So this is a while loop, and here's how we change it into a while loop. Instead of defining I inside, define it outside. And then instead of putting an increment decrement value here, inside of these, if I'm going to do 2 lines of code, I got to add in the curly braces. At the end here, I could say I++. Now this is how we'd run a while loop, and this would actually run exactly like a while loop.
Well, yeah, wait. Well, like even with the semicolons here.
Yep. So you're basically saying you're not specifying the starting or the increment value because because I is already defined outside, and we're doing the increment value inside the loop. So you can run a for loop like that. Now you're not going to see anybody ever do that, but technically you can. Yes, Daniel.
So those semicolons there, does it mean that that you show that they're supposed to be coded, but you just leave it out, so it means it doesn't do anything?
Right, because if I took those semicolons out, it would give me an error. Because in order for Java to run this for loop, it's looking for these 3 things. Now you're allowed to leave it blank, and that's okay, but you've got to have the semicolons in there.
And I have another question.
Sure.
The increment, can it get I that is outside of it, or not? Like if you put I++ at the increment part of the for loop, if it would work.
So if I moved it from here to here,
Yeah.
would it still work?
Yeah.
Let's find out. Yes, it would.
What if you put the I++ in both the increment and inside the code?
What would happen then?
Let me go up.
We go by
If you increment up by 2, but I just want to see it.
So what's it going to print out?
Like 0 to 4.
Sounds like I don't have to teach y'all anything today.
Okay.
Now, so you get the idea, but y'all are intelligent people, and I'm going to ask you a question. I haven't taught you yet, but I want you to trust your instincts here. This is actually something we're going to go over in the next unit. What do you think is going to happen now?
Be an error because I is only defined inside of the loop.
Wouldn't it just print out? Oh yeah. It'll be an error because there's no it's not defined as a string.
So this is something called scope, and scope is something we talk about in the next unit. A variable can be defined within an entire class. Those are instance variables. Within specific methods, and now we can bring scope all the way down to specific loops. The scope of this I is just this loop. It doesn't exist out here. So what's going to happen if I run this line?
Error.
What's it going to say?
It's gonna be like I not defined.
I cannot find I because I is not defined for the class. It's only defined for that loop.
That's so cool.
Okay.
So the for loop can use variables outside of it, but you can't use variables inside of the for loop that work inside.
Right. So before, when I had I defined above the for loop, the scope was the entire class. But when I moved it inside the loop, the scope was just the loop. Isn't that interesting?
It's like a square, like a circle, like a triangle, like a circle.
It's like a pattern.
Okay. I want to practice one of these. Sounds like you've already got it, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But I do want to show you one. I want to test you on it. I'm going to set I equal to 7. I'm going to say while this I is greater than 2. And I'm going to decrement this thing. I'm going to say I equals I minus 2. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I want you to test yourself. Don't say it out loud, but just think about it for a second here. What is this thing going to print out? Don't say it out loud. Just think for a moment. What do you think this loop is going to print out? Who thinks they've got it?
I'm still thinking about it. Hold on.
I think I've got it.
All right, 1 second, Neil.
Probably is wrong.
All right, Neil, what do you think is going to print out here?
I think that it's gonna be 7, 5, 3.
Okay, any disagreement there? 753?
Yes, let's go.
Yep. All right, we're going to practice 5 of those in just a second here. So if you didn't get that one, you're going to have lots of opportunities. Before we practice it, though, I want to show you some instances where for loops are useful. because there's some situations where you definitely want to use a while loop. And there's some situations where you definitely want to use a for loop. One of the cases where you want to use a for loop is if you're dealing with some sort of sum, right? So like, let's say I've got this integer sum, and I just want to add up all the numbers from 1 to 100. Anybody know what all the numbers added together 1 to 100 are? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7. It's 5,050.
Thank you.
You're very knowledgeable.
Well, it's also the third time I've done this lesson.
It's also math.
You could do that very quickly, even quicker than me, with a for loop. What would I set the condition to be here? I is less than what?
101.
Or I could do I is less than or equal to. What should I put the increment value as? You could do I equals I plus 1, or you could do it the fast way, I plus plus. And what do I want to do inside the for loop here?
Well, you want to make something
total
like
as
the other variable.
Yeah, use sum.
Sum equals what?
Equal or plus equals I. Or equals sum plus I.
You could do sum plus I. This would do plus 0, plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4. Or you could do it the other way Daniel was talking about. You could also do sum plus equals I.
And then you put system.out.println sum, right?
What does plus equals do?
It adds the other like number to it and then sets equal to it.
So, Jackie, this is equivalent to saying sum equals sum plus I.
Oh, okay.
These two lines of code are identical. They do the exact same thing. Okay. So, what should happen when I hit execute here?
Should print 500 and 5,000.
Sure does. So, anytime you're trying to add together very large things, for loop's going to help you. Now, I want to show you something interesting here. I'm going to set I equal to 100. And I want to say, well, I is greater than 1. This increment decrement value is usually plus and minus, but it doesn't have to be. It could be division.
Here we go.
So it could be multiplication as well. What do you think it's going to print out now?
50, 100, 50, 25, 12, 6,
Okay.
3, and I think that'll be it.
Let's see. So 100 to what did I forget to add there?
The spacey.
Going to be real hard to read that without a space. I'm glad I captured it on video for all the world to see. All right, so 100 divided by 2 is 50. 50 divided by 2 is 25. 25 divided by 2 is 12?
It's like a decimal thing because they don't include the
Because
decimal.
it truncates it because
It's an integer, so it drops the decimal. So that's decimal division. So if you're going to use division in your for loop, be careful. Yes.
Why doesn't it do the same for 3?
It did. Because 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then what's 3 divided by 2?
1.5.
As an integer.
And you drop out it'll be 1, but 1 is not greater than 1.
So it would.
So
What could I change about this loop to get it?
You can add an equal.
If I put greater than or equal to 1, then what would be the last
Now
number
it'll
here?
be 1 because that's going to be like, oh, you can add that.
So 3 divided by 2 is 1. You heard it here first.
Okay.
And last, nobody else will ever say that. Last thing I want to talk about here. I want to give you a preview of what we're going to do on Friday, which is talk about strings. There are instances where it's nice to use for loops to break apart strings. There's a couple ways to do that. So I need a word. Mega. I like mega. Let's do that. Now, I can take that word mega and break it into the individual pieces, the individual characters, M-E-G-A. For loop's really nice to do that. The way you're going to do that, what's the position of the letter M?
0.
So I'm going to set I equal to 0. And instead of saying I is greater than, I is less than some number, I'm going to say while I is less than word dot length. What is the length of the word mega?
4.
What's the position of the A?
3.
So that's why I'm using less and not less than or equal to.
That makes
There's
sense.
no fourth position. There's a third position. Or you could do less than or equal to word dot length minus 1. And I just want to go through and I'm going to get each piece of this. So I'm going to say I plus plus. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print out I.
So we need this space, right?
So it should just take this word mega and break it into M-E.
That's what 2
I don't want the I, do I? I want, word dot. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. You could use char at position I.
Well, that's the numbers, right? So you're just taking.
Wait, would that work
Is
or
there
not?
also a way, kind of an array?
Because it's a character.
Yes.
And it,
Well, let's see if it works.
I think Mr. Alex, you're smart.
M-E-G-A. You could get each character, and you could do it as a substring as well. But if you use substring, you got to specify 2, the first and the next. So you got to do I comma what? You do I plus 1, because remember, it's not inclusive of the second one. It will also print out MEGA. So there's a third way using the toChar array command. I want to talk about that yet. Let's talk about that second semester when we talk about arrays, because I don't have to talk about arrays today. But there's actually a third way I'm not going to talk about today using arrays.
I don't like arrays.
Arrays are my favorite.
Raise?
But for now, it's enough to know that there's 2 ways to break apart a word. We'll talk about that more on Friday. So that's all I wanted to show you today. Say goodbye to the people watching the video, assuming they made it.